My name is Edgar Pieterse. I'm the director of the African Centre for Cities at the University of Cape Town. The centre works on a whole range of urban development questions, mainly in the global south, but we try and do that from the perspective of urban dynamics in Africa. Today I want to share a few reflections on the role of metropolitan governments in the current global conjuncture. We, at a historic moment, we are on the eve of Habitat 3, which is a major convening that happens every 20 years, where we are able to focus the world's attention on the challenges of urbanization and what that means for the management of settlements. And what is important is that this is happening right after the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted last year by the United Nations, and the Paris Agreement on climate change was achieved in December in Paris last year. Now, both of these two convenings also underscore the centrality of cities in the process of globalization and in the international development efforts to improve quality of life and to also address questions of sustainability. Now, what is clear within this is that all of this is coming on the back of a process of globalization underpinned by major technological innovations, and this has caused all kinds of transformations across the spectrum. These transformations are most acutely seen in major urban agglomerations, and metropolitan governments in that sense carry the disproportionate burden of having to understand what is going on, what the multiple implications are, and figure out how to rewire, if you will, the operating systems of the world's cities and by extension the world's economy. Now, within that, there's a number of critical imperatives that must be addressed simultaneously. One, we've got to radically reduce the rate of resource consumption, and that's natural materials, natural resources and materials that underpin the flow of economic value. And we also have to reduce the degree of carbon emissions that is, of course, generating and continuously exacerbating the dynamics of climate change. At the same time, we've got to figure out how to make sure that the 3 billion people in the world that live below the poverty line and in urban areas tend to find themselves in slums, that the quality of life and the right to dignity of these folk are also enhanced. And finally, we've got to work out how do we improve the efficiencies of urban systems. Now, in a sense, because the globalization requires to be anchored in major urban nodes, metropolitan governments are therefore confronted with the primary responsibility to come to terms with these complex factors. Now, where do they start? What to do? What are their priorities? In the first instance, I think they've got to understand that the investment that they make in every aspect of infrastructural mediation of urban systems can potentially either make urban areas more sustainable or less, can make urban areas more inclusive or more divided, can make urban areas more economically vibrant and diverse, or make these same areas more narrowly focused on elite sectors that doesn't help the general population to improve the quality of life. So the entry point for municipal governments are, of course, the things that are within their control. Now, we know that the two catalytic infrastructural systems that make the biggest short-term impact and sets the tone for the transformation of all infrastructural systems are energy and transportation. And in many parts of the world, and especially in Asia and Africa, where you've got rapidly growing urban areas, there is an amazing opportunity to utilize new technologies and particularly renewable energy sources as the approach to dealing with the energy deficits that exist in these cities and to accommodate future growth. Secondly, we can completely rethink mobility. The era within which every middle-class person wants to and need to own a car is past. And we can now anticipate that we can begin to organize and structure our cities in a way that can deal with new forms of mobility, ranging from public transport options, and there the range is broadened, but also changing the nature of individual mobility needs from non-motorized transport options to also car sharing and, of course, the phenomena that is complicatedly represented at the moment in the form of Uber. But of course, what that points to is the idea of car sharing and carpooling. If these two priority areas are addressed, it then becomes easier to build the cultural confidence and also to change consumer behavior to embrace more sustainable practice with regard to water consumption, waste management, and of course all the other aspects that go into public life. At the same time, municipalities need to recognize that the control they have over land use, and particularly the way in which they can structure and steer growth management into the future, is absolutely central to get the calibration right in the transition from the old modernist extractive infrastructural systems to future systems that will be more sustainable, more circular, and more holistic. And in this sense, to really understand how we move away from a master planning mentality that tend to not work, to one where we really intervene in a much more surgical way in the dynamics of land markets and urban space, in relation to a normative agenda of the right to the city, but also in relation to a normative agenda of greater urban efficiencies and greater social interaction and cultural diversity and cosmopolitanism. Now, these two levers, infrastructural transformation, land use planning, new forms of growth management and planning in the city, represents a massive institutional transformation for metropolitan governments everywhere. We know that whether you're in Europe, North America, or anywhere else in the global south, the current institutional frameworks for metropolitan government simply does not allow them to do these new kinds of tasks. In other words, they are not fit for purpose. And so the big challenge confronting us going into the UCLG summit in Bogota in October, into Habitat 3, and more importantly into the implementation agenda after Habitat 3, is to begin to persuade national governments, international bodies, and also regional associations that we need to place the empowerment of metropolitan governments in particular at the center of the new sustainable development agenda. Thank you.